Thank you for joining today's webinar. We're going to be talking about measuring and managing sustainability as a small business today. My name is Wendy Carradine. I'm the operations manager for the U.S. Supply Chain Sustainability School. We're joined today by Sam Walker, who is a consultant with Action Sustainability. Today's going to be a great talk about a variety of topics that all pertain to reporting, managing, measuring. I think it's going to be a really great session. So really looking forward to having you guys along with us on today's session. Just a few quick housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded, so you will be sent a copy of the slides and the recording after today's session. You'll also receive your certificate of completion. That'll be available on your dashboard. If you do have any issues with that, please reach out and we'll make sure to support you. If you do have any questions, would encourage you to drop them in the Q&A function, and I'll be monitoring that throughout. And you can also use the chat function if you have any questions or comments, or just want to pop a message in the chat to say, who you are and where you're from, maybe where you're joining from. And you can also use the react button there if you want to just give a high five or a heart or a laugh or whatever you feel like doing. I will hand it over to Sam, but just a quick reminder that we will be collecting feedback at the end of the session. Please take a minute to fill that form out. It's really useful, really helpful for us. So if you could take a minute, that would really help me out. And with all of that said, I'm going to hand it back over to Sam, and he's going to take us through today's session. So yeah, thank you, Sam.
Thanks very much, Wendy. And yeah, good morning, everyone. Nice to have you join us for today's session on measuring and managing sustainability as a small business. My name is Sam Walker. As Wendy said, I am a sustainability consultant at Action Sustainability and the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I have a background in sustainability performance measurement and management, also in social value, so looking at community engagement. I also do a lot around carbon and just sustainability strategy more broadly as well. I won't go through the housekeeping. Wendy very kindly did that, so thank you, Wendy. But yeah, just to let you know that slides will be shared. Have any questions, pop them in. Yeah, hopefully we'll get some good questions coming out from today's session. Just to cover a little bit about what we're going to look at today, it's split really into two parts, and that first part is going to be looking at sustainability and introduction. That's going to then lead nicely onto that measurement piece and how do we measure sustainability. And then there's that second piece, which is looking more around, okay, how do we actually manage what we're measuring, and how are we looking at those processes that we have in place when we are measuring sustainability that we can make more efficient and get the data that we want. Not only get the good data, but make sure that it's delivered on time, that we have it on time, and that it's feeding into all of the processes that we have within our organization. But just before I get started, I'd really appreciate everyone just heading over to menti.com. Menti.com is an online software that we use to kind of engage the audience, ask a couple of questions, get an idea of who we've got in the room. So if you could either type into your web browser www.menti.com and then the code 88851342, or if you have your phone to hand, you can just point that up at the QR code here and it will take you directly over to the Menti. Once you're there, if you could just give me a little thumbs up and I will know that you're there. Oh, perfect. We've already got some people here, which is really good. So we'll make a start on that first question, just so I can find out where you're joining us from today. Yeah, where are you coming from? Just give you a moment to respond to that. And thank you. Wendy's kindly dropped in the Menti code and link if you are having troubles accessing that. Okay, so Denver, Vancouver, Toronto, to see. Just leave it. I think there's two other people who are on the Menti, and then a couple of people. If you're struggling to access and join it, just follow that link. Roysons Corporation, Rockaway. Thank you. Good to see lots of variation then, people from loads of different places. So thank you. Leading on to that second question there, how familiar are you with measuring and reporting sustainability at the moment? And I've got 4 different levels here, starting with you're completely new to it. You're the next one up, we started collecting some data but want to strengthen our overall approach to measuring sustainability. Then we've got the next one there, which is we're confident with what data we're collecting, but kind of want guidance on how to report and what to do next. And then that really confident one. So good to see that people are kind of, yeah, maybe have started a little bit, but I need to understand what to do with that data, those processes, how they can set those up more robustly to get that data. Thank you for that one. I'll go to the next one there, which is what are you most interested in measuring when it comes to sustainability? If you're completely new to it, maybe you don't have too much of an idea yet, but if there's a particular topic that you're interested in, this will be quite useful for me to know when I'm going through some examples later. So we've got energy and carbon, waste, material use, modern slavery, skills and training. So, I mean, it's quite typical that we tend to see that emphasis on the energy and carbon and that waste piece. I'll just let the others complete. Okay, so yeah, absolutely. It's that energy and carbon and waste piece, but also some of that social side coming out there as well. So we're looking at modern slavery and also skills and training as well. Um, I do use a lot of examples that kind of lead on from that energy and carbon piece. Where do we start when we're measuring our carbon emissions? That's often a lot of where we get client requirements coming from. You know, we need you to start measuring your carbon footprint or let us know what your carbon footprint is. So it makes sense for me to kind of see this. So thank you for completing that question. And then my last question for you is there anything in particular you'd like to learn from today's session? Have you come with something, a burning question maybe that you'd like a response to? And hopefully I'll touch on this in today's session, but if not, I will have some time at the end for questions. And if not, if we do run out of time, or you'd prefer, you can just type it in the chat or email me directly and I can get back to you. Easy tools that fit the needs of smaller businesses. Oh, that's a good one, but I don't know if there's an easy tool, to be honest, or it depends what you mean by easy. There's tools that absolutely make it more efficient when you're collecting um, data, sorry, but not a particular tool that does it all. And if there is, I can assure you that there's quite a hefty price tag attached to it. Just getting started learning on the topic. Okay, well, I'll leave that open for you to kind of add any other comments that you might have. Oh, carbon credits, carbon footprint reduction. Yes, absolutely. I can go over some of the carbon footprinting stuff. But yeah, I'll leave that open. So if you have any other reflections at any point during today's presentation, you can go back on and add them on. But I'm going to make a start now with our presentation and an introduction to sustainability, really. And before I even go into that, I think we should differentiate between what we mean by strategy, measurement, and management, because I often see that those two terms, especially measurement and management, getting mixed up quite a lot, used quite interchangeably almost. And there is a difference, and it's really important that we acknowledge that when we're talking about sustainability, measurement, and management. So the measurement piece, what we mean by that is the process of collecting and reporting on data on our sustainability performance. And that performance management piece is actually the process of using those measurements to improve outcomes and looking at those processes themselves and reviewing them to make sure that they are designed in a way that is going to allow us to measure sustainability in the most effective way. Also got sustainability strategy in here, which is a really, really key part of performance measurement and management. Often when I do these webinars, I encourage people, if you don't have a strategy already on sustainability or some kind of document that records what your intentions are, what your drivers are around wanting to be sustainable, what your main topics are, that you sort that out before you move on to that measurement piece. And that is because I've also seen it in experience that a lot of people will get involved with that measurement piece without having it and they get lost. They'll ask for data that isn't necessarily going to be relevant to what they want. It's not going to be the most productive use of their time or other resources that they have, probably quite limited as well to be able to measure. So it's really, really key that we have that strategy that does define that. When we talk about the measurement and management process, we can split it into these four main steps. So we have those drivers and that strategy I just mentioned as that first step. And then once we have that established, that's when we can go on and we can look at what a measurement framework is. Then once we've done that, it's about that reporting and analysis piece. And then we want that to be informing what we're doing within the organization. And ideally, we want this to be an iterative process so that once we've collected that data on whatever it is that we're measuring, carbon, for example, we want it to feed back into our decisions within the organization and our approach to reducing carbon emissions, for example. And again, those processes that we have in place that allow us to do that. Just very briefly, kind of bringing it back to sustainability. There is a lot that can be covered under that. With that Menti, we listed out all the different topics, but just to go over them, when we are talking about sustainability, ideally, we're aiming to cover these three pillars, which are the environment, the social side, and the economic element as well. A lot of the initiatives that we implement, we really want to be aiming for that sweet spot in the middle. So we are kind of hitting a benefit to the environment economically and socially, but it can be difficult to do that. There are limitations in the resources we have. Sometimes there are trade-offs in the different initiatives that we want to implement, but that's where we want to be aiming. And we want to make sure that we have a really clear understanding of what sustainability means to our organization when we're coming up with a strategy and that measurement piece. If you're not too sure what to focus on, it starts by kind of asking the question, okay, well, what matters to us? And whatever your drivers are, and we refer to them as those drivers, it's going to depend on where you are or what your clients are asking for. Best thing that you can do for this is get people in a room within your organization and start just asking those questions. If you're a really small organization, it is just about asking, people working for you, why do you think sustainability matters? Are clients asking for something around it, like carbon emissions and what our carbon footprint is? Is it because, as a small enterprise, we're based in a local community, and actually a lot of the stuff that we're doing is supporting that local community already, but we just don't necessarily label it as sustainability or measure it as sustainability and having this positive impact. And we see that quite a lot with SMEs, that they are generally in a position, being that they are smaller and located in communities, to provide these benefits, but they don't always have the resources or know the understanding that that is what they're doing. And that can really, if you do kind of come to implement those processes that allow you to start measuring it, can help you win a lot more work. Suddenly you can answer those questions that are asking you, what are you doing around sustainability? So back to the image on screen, and knowing what to focus on. This is a good way of just kind of having a think about, okay, what's going to be most applicable to me as an organization? But it's also about thinking about the drivers, so the why it matters to you. Again, I've kind of said about the client there, it could be client, but there's other things, quality, profit, health and safety, compliance is a huge one, but also the enablers. And what we mean by the enablers is what could potentially really help you succeed with whatever sustainability topic that you're wanting to focus in, or those topics that you want to focus in on. Digital is huge here, right? We're seeing a lot in the space of being able to use technology. Someone said, what tools exist? So already there's a question around that. Okay, so digitally, what tools can we do to actually enhance and make it easier to measure our carbon emissions, for example? But there's lots of other things, like how can we use procurement as a means to deliver social sustainability, in the communities where we work, and the social impact from that. And there's pieces around management as well, offsite. There's going to be different enablers that allow you to implement those sustainability impacts. I bring up the sustainability development goals at this point because for a lot of organizations who are completely new to reporting and sustainability in general, who don't really know where to start, the sustainable development goals are a really good place to just get an idea of what you could potentially focus on. They provide a lot of guidance within the US, Canada, around the world, UK, Europe, everywhere. They're quite easily understood and people are familiar with them. So it's a good place to start if you're having those conversations around, okay, well, what do we want to start having an impact on, and what do we want to start measuring? If, for example, you are looking at carbon, then it's going to be, okay, how does that relate to climate action number 13 there? And it probably will relate to some of these other elements, these other goals as well. From that, once you know that, you can click on these SDGs and it will come up with much more specific metrics, really. So the information you need to be able to measure what the sustainability impact is on that. So again, it's really good guidance, and it can be used as a framework in a sense, a framework being a it will give you that direction that you need to be able to know what you're measuring, how you're measuring it, why you're measuring it. And I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail shortly. Another way of kind of working out what it is you want to prioritize when we're looking at sustainability measurement is by doing a materiality assessment. And that, again, is having conversations with people, different stakeholders, and having that question around, okay, what is our impact on this particular sustainability topic? So what is our impact as a business on climate change and carbon, on waste and circular economy, on biodiversity? And then you also want to look at it from the perspective of, okay, how important is that to our stakeholders? The local community are going to have different priorities to perhaps leadership within your organization, or anyone who works in some kind of compliance or regulatory position. So it's going to differ. And from those conversations, you can kind of come up with those hot topics, because absolutely understand that as organizations, we are quite limited sometimes with how much we can do. We need to be able to prioritize the impact that we want to have. And that means that maybe we choose 3 or 4 topics that we look at rather than trying to do everything and maybe not doing it as well as a result. Sustainability reporting and just sustainability in general, it's really, really becoming a lot more important in the terms of what clients are asking for. So would really strongly recommend that you start asking questions to your clients, or start looking at what your clients are doing around sustainability, because it can provide a lot of guidance. But we're also seeing a lot of increasing regulation around this as well, especially in California and New York. There's a lot of regulation on, carbon emissions and how you're reporting, sustainability reporting requirements. Oh my goodness. Yeah, absolutely huge one for why we need to be starting to measure and manage. But also there's that piece around brand reputation and many, many more reasons. You're here, so hopefully you have a good idea of why it's important that we are measuring and managing our sustainability impact and doing something around sustainability in general. But what do other organizations focus on when they're talking about sustainability? And this is based on a survey that was completed 2 years ago, where loads of really large organizations, multinational organizations, were asked, what are your top priorities when it comes to sustainability? Unsurprisingly, I think carbon is right up there at the top, carbon emissions from your own operations. So that's looking at what you have direct control over. But there's also other things in here with business ethics, human capital, bribery and corruption came up there. So, and waste again is at that top bit. So you can see kind of environmental elements really, really stood out when talking about this, but not to miss the social elements as well when we're talking about sustainability, especially around that measurement piece, because there are quite a few KPIs or indicators that organizations use and are going to know what your impact is socially on a particular area. So that brings me on to looking at some sustainability frameworks. If we go back to that original image that I showed at the beginning, really key that we have that strategy and our drivers established before we move on to this measurement framework piece. And that is because in that strategy, it should now identify what topics we want to look at and have some context around why that is. The measurement framework is that next piece then, where we're going to be looking at the measurement piece for the first kind of time, really, in a bit more detail. And that consists of this source, collect, and report stage. For that source bit, it's about understanding the data that we need to collect and why. It's about providing proper definitions around some of those terms that we're going to see when we're asking, for example, our suppliers or some of our clients are asking us what it is we need to provide when we're doing that data collection piece, making sure that we have reasonable deadlines, and also if we need to be training people up to be able to collect that data or to be able to manage these systems to allow us to collect that data, that they are. We then have that piece around collecting, which is, actually getting out and collecting that data that we need. We need to make sure it's really clear who is responsible for what. We need to question data quality. So from experience, I've seen, sorry, A lot of people will submit data and say, oh, we've submitted it on time. You go to review it and it's in the wrong unit, or they've just not checked it and they've added an extra zero in by accident. And that, of course, can have a huge impact. If you're measuring your carbon footprint, that can have a huge influence on that. So it's really making sure that people understand that piece around data quality and that we're considering that when we're collecting the data. Also, that piece around missing data and gaps around data. I will come to this later, but sometimes it's not practical for us to be able to collect everything at once and have a full data set for a particular goal that we might want to measure up against. And then we've got the reporting piece as well, which is so, so important. We need to make sure that if we're doing all this work and we're investing all this time into measuring our sustainability impact, that we are also screaming and we are also shouting about what that is and what our impact is. And sometimes it's okay to say, maybe that didn't go to plan, but there is some really good stuff that we're doing here, and this is how we're going to improve on it for next year. That narrative, I think, is far more stronger than just having doing that whole sustainability measurement piece and just allowing it to sit internally without even sharing it with your other stakeholders. Also, really, really key to think, and actually this is a second step, but I would advise to kind of think about this at the beginning as well around who it is you are measuring for, because different stakeholders are going to have different expectations around the data that you need to provide, or more widely around those topics. So it's good to kind of understand where different stakeholders are going to be coming from and their expectations with what it is that you need to collect. That also helps with everything else, really, because then if we're talking about, okay, we need to provide training, it gives you on how we're going to carry out this performance measurement piece and performance management piece around sustainability. It helps you identify, okay, what training do we need to provide to each individual or each person within a certain department or procurement team or etc. If you're a small organization, it's going to be, okay, out of these, who are we really providing this data for? Is it going to just be for clients? Is it just for clients? And I mean, regulators is more likely to be larger organizations, so it is probably going to be clients. And if it's clients, what are they asking for? How are they asking for it? What metrics and what frameworks are they using already that we can try and align to? And I understand it can be challenging because you might have multiple clients based on operations that you have in several states that are asking for different things. That can be tricky, but it's trying to maybe put in the processes, especially around data collection, that allow you to kind of just adopt that process in those different states. And maybe what you're collecting is slightly different, but the process is the same. So if we go on to that developing a measurement framework, so just to kind of summarize, I guess, so far what we've spoken about, when we are talking about sustainability measurement, and that is what we're looking at now, we're not quite yet on that management piece. We want to make sure that we have that strategy. Once we have that strategy, we want to know in detail what it is that we want to measure. And that's where a framework comes in. A framework is going to explicitly spell out your goal, target, your indicator, and your metric. This is four really, really key words to remember. If you take one thing away and you're new to the measurement piece, just this differentiation between the four, because there's a lot of confusion around, even commitments coming in here, objectives coming in. It can be quite a lot. And again, when it's spoken about interchangeably, it can lead to confusion around what data actually needs to be collected. So key to understand that a goal is really, really broad at that organizational level generally. Here we have the example of, just reduce the amount of waste being sent to landfill. Not really much into that, but you have a brief idea of what the focus is then within an organization and that sustainability topic. You've then got the target, which is where you get a lot more specific. And this is where we tend to see percentages. We see numbers. So you might have a baseline year. So if we're talking about carbon emissions, to be able to measure your impact, you're going to need to work out how much you use at this particular point in time, or previously maybe that last year, and you compare against that. That will be your benchline. Your benchmark. So really key that you have these numbers in there. It might be to achieve it by a certain date. So we see again a lot of carbon targets to be net zero by 2040 or to be net zero by 2050. It's just got to be as specific as possible as we can make it. The indicator then is really, really important because that is going to be how you measure your progress up against that benchmark. So here, typically it's going to be a percentage, but it can also be a number, but it would allow us. So if we go back to that example of, okay, we want to achieve a 20% reduction in our carbon emissions by 2030, your indicator will be percentage of carbon reduction, and that is what you would use to measure. And that might be made up of many different indicators in itself. You might be looking at, okay, how much waste is sent to landfill compared to recycled, what the percentages around that. So we want to be aiming for a 50% reduction in waste sent to landfill. We want to have a 50% reduction in the amount of water that we're using. We want to have a 20% increase in the amount of recycled material that we're using. So it just shows you that progress that you're making against the target. So really key to get that right. And then we've got that metric as well, which is that data collection point. What data do we actually need to collect to be able to measure our indicator? Going back to that carbon example there, it's going to be looking at, okay, well, how much energy are we using within our organization, within our office? It might be if we have vehicles that are directly owned, how far are they traveling? What type of fuel are they using? Which then allows us to say, okay, well, we know that it's this amount of carbon emissions that are being generated from that. How does that compare? And we can make that percentage and make that comparison as a result. So really key to establish these when you're coming up with a framework, and a framework is absolutely necessary when you're doing that sustainability measurement piece. Last thing I will just point out on this is that sometimes it's okay not to have a target straight away. If it's completely new to you, you might need to spend some time going out into industry and working out what is actually a realistic target for you, rather than just picking something that is out of thin air and you hope that you can meet it, but then it becomes 2 years before you're supposed to meet it, and you're like, no, we've got no chance. We need to reassess. So it's better to take that time at the beginning to just do some research, look at what your competitors are doing around this, look at what your clients are doing, and see what might be realistic. And there are some topics that are completely new and there isn't much guidance out there on it. Again, that's where some frameworks can come in because, as I'll go on to in a sec, there are some established frameworks that exist, like the Sustainability Development Goals that I mentioned, that might give you a better idea of what you need to measure, how you can measure it, some of those indicators, etc. If you are completely new to coming up with your own framework, advise that you kind of take this away. So do look back at the slides afterwards and just have a think about, okay, all of these different topics, what maybe are some of the goals, KPIs and metrics that you can think of that would fit quite nicely into here. It can be hard if you're completely new to the topic, but this is where, again, go look at the SDGs, go look at what your clients are doing, and you can start filling it in, and that will hopefully give you an idea of maybe what's realistic to you. As an SME, completely realize that you probably don't have time to create all these really long targets for every single topic. Focus on carbon emissions, carbon footprinting, and generally from carbon footprinting and doing all that work around carbon emissions, it's quite a good umbrella into other topics like waste and water use. And it flows quite naturally onto that. So if you have carbon targets for that first year, again, if you're new, that's absolutely fine. Then the next year, maybe you can introduce something that looks more at waste and looks at water and reducing water use. Again, it's going to depend on what's a priority for your organization. Water isn't often voted as like a really high topical sustainability topic to look into. It is becoming more and more prevalent, but if you are a manufacturer, for example, that uses water in your manufacturing processes, then it's going to become perhaps more of a topical issue than another organization where it isn't. So with that being said, I just want to hop back over to menti.com for my another question. Um, and this is just really to know if you are using any sustainability frameworks at the minute, or if you're new to it, if you've heard of any of those sustainability frameworks. So, have you heard of the SDGs? A couple of others here, like we've got the Global Reporting Initiative. They're usually done by larger organizations, but interested to just know at this point if you've heard of any frameworks and if you have, what they are. So, if you could just say, yes, I've heard of the SDGs, we use it, or we're starting to look at it, or you can just say no. Just gives me a good idea of where people are when it comes to sustainability measurement. So I will give you an opportunity to complete that. Cute. Yeah, fair enough. Hopefully that's provided a bit of context on what a framework is. And it is really, really important if we're coming to this measurement piece that we have an established framework. SBTIs, yeah, absolutely. The Science-Based Target Initiative. So for those who maybe aren't aware of what the Science-Based Target Initiative is, we see a lot of organizations making commitments and aligning with the SBTIs. It's a declaration to say we're going to reduce our carbon emissions by a certain amount by a certain date. And often with them, because it is quite a large, well-known organization that also they verify your targets and your commitments, it is seen as more robust. So it's a good place to start. They have a offering specifically for larger organizations and then one for SMEs. So it can be a little bit more practical that they offer that alternative. I'm new to the frameworks and looking for direction. Okay, so hopefully that's giving you a little bit of context around the different frameworks that exist. You've got SB, the you have got SBTI. I'm getting it confused with the Sustainable Development Goals, too many S's. And then you've got the GRI. But honestly, I think if you're an SME and you're at this position where you don't really know where to start, the best thing you can do is just by taking that spreadsheet that I showed you and doing that research and seeing what your clients are asking for and how they're asking for it and aligning to that. Um, so thank you for completing that. Just to go over that again, because I think that's really important, just as a reflection based on those comments. Just make sure that you have a really clear goal, make sure you have that really clear target, make sure you have a clear indicator, and make sure you have clear metrics as well. And that, to start with, is a good framework. That's all you need. It doesn't have to be really costly because there are, when you start going into GRI and you go into some of these other frameworks that exist, it can become quite high cost. So that's going to be more relevant to you. Try your hardest to get people in one room and have those conversations and say, okay, what are our topics and what do we think could be some goals around here and all of that. But yeah, that's the best place that you can start. Also, to kind of put this in context for you, because understand that people are very new to this, I've got some examples here of how you can use that different target indicator metric application to those different sustainability topics. So I would take a look at this after as well. I'll run through it quickly now, a couple of examples, but afterwards, if you're looking for that inspiration on knowing where to start, it's a good place to look. So for waste produced, we've got, reduce the waste we produce by 90% by 2030. Why is this a good target? Because we can see a percentage in there and we can see a date by which it wants to get achieved. The indicator there is the percentage reduction in waste produced. Then the metric that we're going to be asking for is going to be the amount of waste produced in that particular year. That's often measured in, well, it depends on whatever unit you want, but for example, in this case, it would be tons. And then where would you find that data? You can have a look, construction, demolition, excavation, waste material. They should also keep records of that type of thing. And you can also keep data by the type. So it could be plastic, rubber, metal, cardboard as well. There's another one here on diversion from landfill, which I'm just going to have a drink so you can quickly read. Oh, thank you. That looks at, yeah, diversion of waste by 98% by 2024. I won't keep repeating myself, but love this because we've got a date in there and we've got a percentage. What would make it even better is if there was a reference to a baseline year. So it would be 2019, 2020, that's what we're measuring it up against. Here for water, so we got achieve a year-on-year reduction on our water consumption, and then one on water harvesting and reuse, achieve 10% water reuse by 2024. This is on carbon. Just unpicking carbon a lot because it seems to be where there's a lot of interest. We'll go through the different scopes here. So back to Science-Based Targets Initiative, which someone mentioned, which is which is going to help you align and come up with targets, realistic targets for carbon emissions. It's broken down into scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And this aligns with something called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is used universally, where they differentiate different business activities by these scopes. Scope 1 is direct. Within your organization, what do you have direct influence on when we're talking about carbon reduction? So that example that we usually see is on vehicles that you own. You own those vehicles, you know how much they're being driven and where they're being driven to, what type of vehicle they are. You have complete control over that. So that would be a scope 1 emission. Then your scope 2 is typically going to be your energy and your electricity that you're using within your office, or if you're on a site within your site, if you're powered up to the grid. And that is, yeah, going to be, again, the main scope 2. And then scope 3 is everything that's indirect. Scope 3 activities is a bit of a minefield if you're new to it, knowing where to start, because it does cover things like waste and water and employee commute and business travel and the goods that you're consuming, the resources you're using, everything. It can be a lot. But if you're new to it, focus on those scope 1 and scope 2s. And that, again, is quite common when we talk about the Science-Based Targets Initiative, that we see that focus on scope 1 and scope 2. But do also consider scope 3 as well in that. We've got some on community here, which is looking at it's more around time as a metric, or amount spent. So here it was pounds. We've got smart targets as well, which is really important to emphasize. I kind of touched on it with the dates and things like that, but just make sure when you're coming up with those targets that they are really robust. And by robust, I mean that they are smart. So you can see that they're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and that they are time bound as well. Once you've got that framework sorted, you can come to collecting your data. Just to get everyone back on Menti, I'd be quite interested just to know at this point, what do you think your biggest barriers are going to be to getting good sustainability data? So if you haven't started collecting data, what's putting you off? Is there something in particular that you think might be a particular challenge? Or if you have started, is there something that you're struggling with already? Just interested to know. So consistency, yeah, it's really, really difficult to make sure that you're getting good quality data on a consistent basis. This is where training can be really, really important, having really clear expectations for if you're collecting the data, what you need, where you're collecting it from. If you can have those conversations with people on what you need, can really help. Anyone else? Anything to add to that? Feel free to put it in the comments. Data availability, yeah, absolutely. If you're new, you might not have all the processes that you need set up to be able to collect everything. So bang on. I'll leave that up. Interesting for us to know. And yeah, having the right tools to measure. Oh, here they're coming in now. Not having the frameworks in place to understand what data we need. Yeah, so hopefully go back, do that framework exercise, having the right tools to measure. Yeah, tools can make it a lot easier. It's not a problem to have spreadsheets and use Excel spreadsheets to begin with, but if you can find some kind of tool to use that will make it more efficient, it can be a lot easier and make that process a lot easier. Okie dokie. I will head back over and we will just go through some top tricks and top tips, sorry, and tricks for data collection. So I've touched on a couple of these already, But again, it fits quite nicely. If we're at the beginning of this journey, keep these things in mind because it will also influence perhaps what you decide to measure and how you measure it. If you go through these and you think, oh, there's no one who's going to be responsible for that, then maybe you can have a think about, okay, well, what processes can we set up now that might make that better? Or maybe we should record it in a different way and it would fit better within this person's remit to be able to collect the data. So good to have these in mind. But going through them, we want to be really clear that we're defining what we need when we're collecting data and why we need it. People need to understand. We need to get people invested in it. And that's where that target piece comes into so nicely. And that goal, if people can see the full story around how that data being collected is fitting into our bigger picture, they're more likely to collect that data and give it to us. There's that piece around standardizing the inputs, which is if you can make sure it's just really clear that you have templates that can be used or you have definitions on different things. We see this a lot with when we're talking about the social side, this idea of local. Clients will ask for some kind of local benefit to be demonstrated, but local can really be quite a broad term for some organizations, and for others it can be very specific. So if you're in that position, just make sure you're being very clear about what it is that you're asking for and that you have some kind of glossary in a sense that's going to be able to make it clear for other people collecting it. You want to make sure that whoever's responsible for that data and collecting that data is aware of that and what their responsibilities are. Within that, it's really clear sorry, it's really important that they know how often they need to collect that data, what they need to collect, where they need to collect it from. So have a look at those slides earlier with kind of where you get that source data from. You want to make submission easy. So this is where whoever is mentioning about the tools, this is where tools can really help. There is a difference between a tool and a framework, but some tools also have a framework embedded. But a tool really is just a platform designed to allow you to collect data into one place and then do various different things with that data. So for some, they allow you to analyze it or present it into different graphs that you can use. Others will, yeah, go into more depth with analyzing, but the framework doesn't do that. The framework is just kind of allowing you to know what it is that you need to measure and how. You've got validate and sense check, absolutely really, really key, making sure people are entering the data correctly or you're collecting it correctly. Ideally, you'll have someone else involved in this process. So if you are collecting the data, there's someone else reviewing it because we might miss mistakes. If I collect data, then I might just accidentally and not acknowledge that I've put an extra zero in there. And then that piece around tracking progress and refining it. And that goes into this iterative process really that we want to be achieving where we're making sure that it feeds back into our sustainability strategy and our overall approach towards measuring sustainability. Piece here on ensuring a good response because that is absolutely vital. We want to make sure that we focus on key areas, identify the right person. I've gone through a lot of these already, but have a look at this as well and use it as a reference. It should be really useful. And again, these are some cheat sheets that you can use that I've provided at the end for carbon emissions in particular. So if you're new and you're like, how do we start measuring our carbon footprint? At the end of this slide deck, when it's sent out, you'll have some guidance on that. Someone commented on the data. So what do you do? Yeah, if you can't get all the data that you need, and it's completely fine, especially when you're starting out with this, to not be able to collect everything. And I think that is a reality often for a lot of people. In those situations, it's okay to collect sample data. So if we're talking about carbon emissions and we're talking about, what if we're looking at energy used over the year, it's okay to look at your energy use in 6 of those months rather than the full 12 if you can't get all that data, and then you can make assumptions based on that on what it would be for the full year. We want to be aiming to get real data for the year. Absolutely, but it's okay if you can't, and it's going to take too much time to do that the first time you do it, to use things like sample data and proxy data. And it's just important that if we do that, that we are transparent about it and we are telling our clients about these assumptions that we're making. Okay, so if we go into the performance management piece, measurement is so key. I spend more time talking about the measurement piece because it really sets it up nicely. If you measure and you have those processes in place that allow you to measure correctly, then it's going to allow that managing piece to be a lot easier as well. But going into performance management then, why are we doing this piece? Again, I've seen a lot of data that's just collected and is never used, and that's not the purpose of why we want to be doing sustainability measurement and reporting as well. We don't just want to be able to provide that data back to our clients who are asking for it or whoever's asking for it, other stakeholders. We want to actually be feeding it into our overall approach. So if we do that correctly, it can really help and benefit us because it can allow us to see, what it is we need to improve and where we need to improve, where we need to intervene, prioritize resources, and make those informed decisions as well. So really, really key that we keep that in mind. Just to kind of show that when we're talking about this performance management cycle, it is almost a sub-cycle of another cycle that we have when we're talking about sustainability strategies in this instance. And it is about, okay, so we've done that measurement piece, we've done that data collection piece that we've just gone through. It's about interpreting that data, deciding what we do with that, acting upon it, and then we go down and we review it all again, those specific processes. That is what management is. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about performance management with the sustainability measurement that we're doing. And it's just about storytelling. If we can tell it to people in the right way, we can get people invested. So, what do I mean by that? Think of ways that you can engage people and it really help you build that storytelling narrative. So it is about keeping it visual. Can we use graphs and can we use different infographics to present the data? Can we start with different insights that we've kind of collected from the data? So, we found this and this means X, Y, Z. This is what we're doing about it. Using plain language, because again, people I think often get quite lost when we're talking about sustainability in general, but also that measurement and management piece, goals, targets, KPIs. It can be a lot. So just making sure that we are really clear and we are specific when we're using the language, talking around measurement. Explaining why it matters, we need that investment, understanding why people are interested in it, linking the results to the strategy. So again, don't just want our sustainability strategy to sit on a shelf. We want to be doing something about it. Celebrating our improvements, so important, because a lot of people will talk about challenges and they will talk about, especially in the media, sustainability wise, that it's always the negative that's picked up. So if we can scream and shout a bit more about the positives that we've kind of come across through that measuring piece, then hopefully we can get more people invested into it as well. And then be transparent about the challenges and that data piece as well around the completedness of our data. So many different ways that you can present data to have and engage people. So you've got bar charts, you've got tables, line graphs, pie charts for proportion here. We've got heat maps for categories and locations. Radar charts are a really good way of showing prioritization. Visual indicators for quick summaries. Pictures are great, absolutely. And the infographic that I mentioned there as well. So you can have a look at some of those ways that you can present the data. Oh, and of course, dashboards as well. Just finally, then, in my final section before I move on to any questions, so do pop them in. I know that there's one in already. Getting buy-in. How do we get people invested in doing this sustainability measurement piece? And this goes in again, really, with that management piece, because with those processes, we want to make sure that they are being kept on top of and that people are actually doing what they need to do. Why does it matter? I think, again, it goes back to if we don't have that buy-in, then we're not going to be able to measure in the correct way, and we're not going to be able to actually have maybe as much of a positive impact that we could have through those actions that we can take based on what we've measured. But other elements here, it's really key that we have that buy-in because it does drive higher quality data, more timely reporting, accurate decision making, and as a result of all of that, really better sustainability outcomes. Really key to acknowledge the role that people play in collecting data and just these processes in general. Tools are really good, but it is going to be people who are still going to be collecting that data unless you have some kind of API or other software set up to allow you to do that, but it's still going to be people who need to come along and collect. Where you are thinking about that buy-in and making sure that you get that buy-in, this is again where it's really key to kind of think about, okay, who is it that's delivering on this. Once you've worked out who it is, then you can have a think about, okay, what matters actually to each of those stakeholders and why should they be buying into it. A couple of examples here, very, very broad. It might be different in your organization, but generally what we tend to see is that, leadership, they care about sustainability reporting because of that risk, that cost, that reputation, that compliance piece, especially that compliance piece. What are we doing? We have to comply to this to make sure that we can win work X, Y, Z. Um, so really important to kind of understand the narrative that they're coming from to drive how we can tell the story about why collecting that data is important and why that whole sustainability measurement piece is important. Another couple of examples there, you've got community who are there going to be looking really at kind of jobs and well-being and the local benefit. That is what they're going to want to be seeing when they're talking about measurement. And so when we're providing reports on that particularly, you're going to want to really kind of simplify it and just maybe have like A4 pages of, this is the stuff that we're doing. Videos are great for this, social media, great way of reaching out to different communities and telling your story. And that's going to be different to, leadership. I couldn't imagine sending like a TikTok to or an Instagram post or like a case study that maybe you've done to someone in your leadership team, but it works for some stakeholders, might not work for others. It's just about differentiating, knowing what people would or what would work best with people. And then from that, you can try and get that buy-in. Just last couple of pieces really on that communication piece to get that buy-in. Feel free to use this as a checklist when you go away, but again, it's really key to explain, the why. Why does it matter that we're doing this? It's really important that we're clear on how the data is actually going to feed into our whole story around sustainability. We want to keep reporting simple and visual. We want to make sure that we are sharing our early wins and improvements. I've spoken about externally, but internally is really important as well. Can we, in morning meetings, can we talk about some of the things that we've been doing around sustainability and some of those successes, if not being done already? And then we've got things around using plain, not non-technical, logical or non-technical, sorry, language there, communicating consistently, and then being open to about challenges and gaps. And that last one is really key. I've mentioned about the transparency piece on any assumptions that are made when you're collecting data, but it's also more wider than that. I think just sometimes when you have a sustainability report or some way that you're communicating what your impact is through the measurement, that you're talking about the processes that involves. Now, for us, we have a carbon footprint report that we publish. There's a whole page where we talk about what that means, and the processes involved with that. And any stakeholder who's interested can go in and have a look at that. And people can say, hey, I don't think that's the best way of doing it. And maybe they think that, and they can let us know. And from that, we can try to improve that process. So it can open you up sometimes potentially to that criticism, but it's better to do that than to just hide away and then in 5 years' time someone finds out and it gets blown up and it's all over the media. So much better to just be as transparent as you can when we're talking about sustainability measurement. Okay, so thank you very much. Realized I've been talking at you pretty much for the last hour almost, so hopefully that's helped you a little bit with knowing where to start with sustainability measurement and that management piece as well. It's been interesting doing the Menti just so I can see kind of where people are. Do put in any questions that you might have now. We've still got 5 minutes. I know, Wendy, you were saying there is one question here, which I can
Yeah,
have a look
it
at.
actually ties in with the, it's making me think of the conversation we are just having about buy-in, because we have a partner in the US who one of their key deliverables is value engineering, which is a very difficult thing to measure in terms of carbon reporting. So when you're dealing with something that you're trying to, spin a good news story around, it's quite difficult to do that when it's not like, oh, we removed this one component and now we've saved X amount of carbon. Gary, I feel like that ties in really well with your question about, well, if you're reducing maintenance requirements, or if you're talking about extending the life of a building or an asset, that's a kind of a difficult thing to measure and manage. But there is obviously carbon savings or resource savings when it comes to that sort of thing. So yeah, Sam, do you want to speak on that at all or?
Yeah, absolutely. We find this a lot with sustainability measurement, right? There's a lot of things where it's going to have a positive sustainability impact, but there's not quite that process in place or framework in place, really, that is going to allow you to capture it accurately. And that's another point, actually. There's some frameworks that might exist that have some kind of proxy that allow you to capture it a little bit, but how accurate they are, it can really depend, and each framework might have their own. But that is where frameworks are perhaps the best place to look, or what others are doing in this space. That's not the best answer. It's completely going to depend on what that client is going to be asking for, or how they're doing it. If there's anything around that that they can provide or gives you an indication. If it is completely new, then this is where we can sometimes put pressure on different frameworks to start exploring what those impacts can be. But yeah, it is really difficult. I suppose I rely less on that quantitative piece and just include it in the case study as a whole and qualitatively talk about what it is that you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, just a friendly reminder to pop any other questions that you have in the chat. Gary, I'm going to reach out with a couple of resources for you because I think that there's some things that are popping into my head right now that I think might help you out with this question. But yes, if you don't have any other questions, thank you so much to everyone for joining today. If you do think of anything in the future, please reach out to us. Sam, I'm not sure if your contact details are in the slides, but we should be able to get your information out to our attendees just in case anyone has any questions that they'd like to follow up on. You're more than welcome to do so. Friendly reminder once more to complete the survey. That would be really helpful. Otherwise, yeah, I'm just going to say thanks to Sam for putting on a great session. It was really informative. Love hearing the breakdown. And thank you again for joining us this morning. And I hope you have a lovely Thursday, Friday, weekend, all that, and hope to see you at the next session.
Thanks, Wendy. And yeah, it's been really good to come on and speak. So thank you. And I will put my email address in the slides when they're sent out. So yeah, people
Awesome.
can reach out if they need to. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a nice
Great.
day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.